read the discipleship initiation, which I've, of course, read many times. Swami wrote it about 1983, so it's been around a really long time. But after we name all the gurus, the first word is Divine Mother. And so, when I first went to India, which was in 1986, I had I just had all these ideas about what it was. I'd lived at Ananda Village 15 years by that point, and those early years at Ananda Village were it was sort of I don't know if the word fantasy world is actually what I really want to say, but it's really close to that because uh, we just sort of, a fantasy in this respect. We were living through incarnations we remembered, I think, in being a little Indian village living with Swamiji. Swamiji was much closer to his own time in India. He left India in 1962. I moved to Ananda Village in 1971, and he was still living a lot in that Indian bhav. And he wore a dhoti a great deal of the time. In the summer, he would go bare chested with just his dhoti and his mala. I mean, not a very Western look, but a very common look in India. He had his hair very long, he had a beard. Um, and he did lots of Indian chanting. Later on, actually, Swami decided that uh, the call of the Indian bhav was so strong in him that if he was going to actually do any good work in America, he had to repudiate it. And in the early 80s, he even shaved his beard for a while. He cut his hair short. He started wearing Western clothes, even when he would speak in public. He just changed a lot. But during those, especially the first decade, we sort of had our own way of living out the Indian teaching. And part of it was we really had very little understanding of the deities and the different gods and goddesses and what it all meant, and had this very Western either or attitude, is really what I'm going, where the only place I'm going with this. And I remember how confusing it was when we arrived in India and there would be a festival to Kali, and then there would be all these other deities around, and we would think this is supposed to be about Kali, or this is supposed to be about Shiva, and everybody's singing to Krishna, or this is supposed to be about Krishna, and they're all thinking about Shiva. And the Indian mind was easily able to just see different facets of a diamond. We kept wanting to know which one we were supposed to concentrate on. And over the years, that experience, I've traveled there many times. I've never lived in India, but I've traveled there often. And just maturing on the spiritual path, one begins to really understand it in a wholly different light. And Swamiji himself was deeply devoted to God as the Divine Mother. That was really how he saw himself. At the end of his life, he went to Medjugorje, where the Divine Mother, in the form of Mother Mary, was appearing to the visionaries there. And he asked one of the very deep visionaries, Viska, that he met there, he said, "Please ask Divine Mother if there's anything more I can do for her." He said, "I've tried to do everything I can think of, but please ask her if there's anything more I can do for her." This was like a year before Swami died. It was right at the very, very end of his life. Later, when he was asked, um, "Did you get an answer?" He said Viska never responded to him, but he said inwardly he felt Mother's approval. But I thought to myself, here's Swami, who was a disciple for what, 60 years? And it was like, I've done everything I can think of to serve Divine Mother. And what was he serving when he was doing that? This is one of the things that characterizes our particular spiritual path, which is really important to realize, is that Master came to bring us an understanding of God as Divine Mother. But it wasn't that he advocated worshiping Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus. That was never there. And in fact, and Swami himself can't draw actual, like, he doesn't really quite know what this means. But when Master came into the monk's dining room, when Swami was still a monk at SRF, there was a statue of Mother Mary, and Master suggested that they not have it there. Now, Swamiji didn't never understood whether it was because it was the wrong image for this age, or whether Master just didn't think it was an appropriate place for that statue, or whether it was appropriate for that group of men. Swami himself can't say. But even though Master was very devoted to Divine Mother, he never gave that mother any particular form. Nowadays, Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, has been appearing, all over the world, and has been for the last 100 years, to many, many people. Medjugorje, she still continues to appear every day to some of those visionaries, and she's played an enormous role in reawakening devotion in the world. But Master never put a form to the Divine Mother that he particularly worshiped. It was just Mother herself. And I've and he said that was what he was that was one of the purposes of his incarnating and coming to the West. So we have to understand what the mother image of God really means. And I find actually, even though Jesus himself only spoke of God as the Father, and during his lifetime, the devotion to his mother was not, the disciples were devoted to his mother. After he died, after Jesus was crucified, Mary actually was the spiritual heart of the life of the disciples. It's very deep and beautiful when Jesus gave the care of his mother over to the apostle John, and John took her in as his own mother after that. All the disciples, all the apostles, cared for Mary as if she was their own mother. So there was something very deep and profound there. But nonetheless, in the life of Christ, Jesus himself did not direct us that way. But Master interprets the esoteric of the Bible that Jesus was speaking of the feminine expression of the divine. And see, this is what we have to understand. Father and mother, male and female, man and woman, comes afterwards. Everything in this world is a symbol of an eternal reality. And the eternal reality is that it is yin yang. Yin yang is the best symbol to use because it's neutral. It's gender neutral. The whole circle is created by two exactly equal halves. And you can't have the whole without the halves. And so in creation itself, there's the masculine and the feminine. There's the active and then there's the receptive. And there are men and women because above the level of material expression, there's this constant dance. Spirit and nature, sometimes it's called, whatever. Radha Krishna, but those are all symbolic. But here's the point. When Jesus said to the disciples, I will send you the Comforter, and the Comforter will teach you in ways I have not been able to. When Master interprets it, Master says what Jesus meant by the Comforter was the feminine, the divine form of God. Now, to my mind, I can't think of a more beautiful and perfect way to describe not women, but the ideal of the feminine love, which we can glimpse through mother love, through the idea of human mother love, the ideal of human mother love. But what we feel is the Comforter. And both aspects of the divine are needed because the masculine says divine law must be followed. It says divine law must be followed. If you act contrary to the way God made you, the consequences of that are going to be suffering. It's not that God is punishing you, it's simply the way that we're made. And so if that's the way that we're made and we violate it, if you take your hand and you put it into the flame on the gas stove, the way your physical hand is made, it will be severely hurt, even destroyed by that flame. The flame is not punishing you, God is not punishing you. It's simply the way that we're made. If you don't eat the proper nutrition, your body begins to die. If you don't drink water, your body begins to become ill. If you don't have enough oxygen, it's the way we're made. And on a higher level, happiness comes to us when we cooperate with the truth of our divine nature. And the masculine expression of the divine merely states that impersonally. It's not cruel, it's not unkind. The father loves us as much as the mother loves us, but the father can't break his own laws. But the mother comforts us when we suffer. Because inevitably we break divine laws because we're just a mass of whirling vrittis, and those vrittis suck our consciousness in directions that we know better, but we're just not able to resist. One of my own sort of phrases that I use a lot because it helps me is it seemed like a good idea at the time. No matter how ludicrous it turns out to be, no matter how misguided, no matter how silly, I wouldn't have done it if it didn't seem like a good idea at the time. But then, of course, when it all goes wrong, as it so often all goes wrong, even in order to have the energy to try again, we rush to the arms of the mother, and she comforts us. She doesn't excuse us. She doesn't tell us that we were right when we were wrong. She doesn't spoil us. She doesn't reward us for our stupidity, but she comforts us. And what Master wanted us to understand when, when Moses presented the law to the Jews, it was in the form of commandments. They had been enslaved. They needed to understand how to be a free people. It was Kali Yuga descending. It was the time. It was what was appropriate. All the masters have the same teaching, but the culture, the time, the disciples dictated. So the Leela of the progression of Judaism, which became Christianity, which is Sanatan Dharma in its form, is first there's the law. Then Jesus came and he progressed it to the Father because the law had become an instrument of oppression. There was a corrupt priesthood who was using it for its own power. And the power of the law had more or less run its course. It would be another way of saying it. I'm not speaking of Judaism, I'm talking of a spiritual bhav, because we weren't quite up on the ascending side of the yugas, but we were moving toward it, and Jesus was planting the seed. So he brought us to the Father. If you ask of your father a loaf of bread, will he give you a stone? And then he told us that which belongs to the Father belongs to the Son. And even the prodigal son, the one who disappoints his father, when he comes back and returns to his father, he's still the Father's son. And so Jesus moved us from fear, from fear of being harshly judged, which is how, and it has to be said, how the teaching of Moses had degenerated, because you see these things degenerate. The revelation is always true and complete. The avatar brings the revelation, then human beings turn it into a religion. And religions tend to deteriorate. And then, according to the Bhagavad Gita, the avatar returns. When virtue declines and vice predominates, I, the infinite spirit, take visible form to destroy evil and restore Dharma. So the teaching of Moses had become confused in the hands of a corrupt priesthood. So the sincerity of the devotees drew Jesus to them. And Jesus said, God is your Father. And oh, with great relief, people embraced that God is our Father. And then Jesus hinted, because he will send you the Comforter. But by the time Master came, the yugas are ascending, and we don't need to be afraid of God anymore. And we don't need to be anxious about our worthiness. And we must pay attention to our Father's law, but our mother will always comfort us. And in my own experience and observation of the spiritual path, this is what I was saying to Shreda and Patrick about this, to all who received him. So what keeps us from receiving him? Just a whole cascading series of self-definitions, none of which are accurate, and all of which are completely irrelevant to Divine Mother. And the more completely we can be, as Jesus said, like little children coming to Divine Mother, the more easily she can hold us in her arms. If we hold her at arm's length, then she can't come any closer than we allow her. I want to end by telling you a story of one of Master's disciples that I learned from Master's family in India. When for about 20 years, not every year, but frequently, I was part of a group of people who led pilgrimage tours to India, following in the footsteps of the Master. Now the Expanding Light and many other people do the same tours, but for a number of years it was something. It was our particular enterprise, and over that time we became very good friends with Master's family, with the Ghosh family in Calcutta, and over time they opened up more and more to us. And Hari Krishna Ghosh, who was Master's nephew, who was the son of Sananda, Master's younger brother, when we started going in 86, Sananda had passed away, but Hari Krishna was the head of the household at 4 Garpar Road. And his wife Anjali, his daughter-in-law Sarita, and his son Somnath. If you go there now, you meet Somnath and Sarita. Hari Krishna and Anjali are gone. And you meet their children, Sudarshana and Sulagna, who are both grown-up women now. So one of our trips, after we'd gone several times, we discovered that Hari Krishna had a sister who was about 10 or 12 years younger, and her name was Shefli. And one of our trips, we met Shefli, and we heard Shefli's story of her life with Master, because Master left India in 1920. He came back in 1935, 36. He was in India. And that was the only time that the people in India actually got to see Master from 1920, because Master died in America. So Shefli, when Yogananda came to India, was 3 years old. And she herself tells us this story, told us this story through a translator, because she didn't speak English, told us this story, but she doesn't remember it. It's just that it was always told to her. Her parents told her and retold her this story. She's 3 years old. A 3-year-old is completely uninhibited and absolutely believes that the entire world revolves around them, because it does. Any of you who've raised children or ever watched children, you have all these adults. Once a new baby comes into an extended family, all the holidays become all the adults just sitting around watching and adoring the child. That's just the way it works. And sometimes I think for the child, is this really so much fun? But in any case, that's how it works. So Shefli was 3 years old when Master came, and she absolutely adored him. As soon as she saw him, she knew for an irrefutable fact that he belongs to me. And she knew that he adored her. There was no question in her mind that whenever he was there, he wanted her close to him. And she behaved accordingly. She would run to him, she would hold onto his leg, she would climb onto his lap, she would grab onto his hand. Wherever he was, she insisted on being close to him. If she was taken away from him, she would begin to cry. And of course, Master responded, because she was in a 3-year-old body, but her soul was infinite, eternal. And her discipleship to Master was not a 3-year-old's discipleship, it was simply discipleship. And so she just told us, numerous stories of how everyone said her life revolved around Master's presence. And then they tell one particular story where they were going out to a movie for some reason. Sometimes, apparently, Master would go to movies because it would sort of give him a break, is how Swamiji described it. He could just sit in a movie theater and watch whatever movie he wanted to watch, in his own consciousness, and there would be no demands upon his time. So Shefli was too young to be allowed in the movie theater. But when it became apparent to her that Yogananda was going to leave and she was not going to be taken with him, she just had an absolute fit. So he picked her up, and she was a very small child, and he put her against his chest, and then he buttoned his coat around her. And in that way, they went into the movie theater, and she spent the whole movie just lying like this with her head against the heart of her guru. Can you imagine? Now, what I went through when I first heard that story was a little part of me thought, oh, her only contact in this body with her guru was wasted because she was 3 years old. And then I thought, suffer little children to come unto me, for of such are the kingdom of heaven. And I thought, oh, what a grace to be so young that one could simply and totally respond from the heart without the slightest sense that I'm not wanted or I'm not worthy. That's what Jesus meant when suffer little children to come unto me, for of such are the kingdom of heaven, because children have their full karma. They may look innocent, but they're not innocent at all. They're just not old enough yet to express their nature. But childlike is to assume and to know without any question that I am loved. And that's what discipleship is. That's all Master really wants us to know. We try to be good in all these different ways, and it's important. The Father exists, break divine law, and we will suffer. But what we really want to do, as I was saying earlier, is to see ourselves as God sees us. We are nothing but beautiful light. And we can take that light and merge it into the Master's light, and all he will say is, welcome, my child. God is the comforter. Master is the comforter. Divine Mother, all the gurus, even Sri Yukteswar. We are their very own. And this is where our freedom and our joy will come from.